It is a requirement in impeachment proceedings that the impeaching house cannot introduce any new grounds at the Senate stage. They are held to account on the grounds as approved by the National Assembly. The ground was that the Deputy President made a scathing public attack against the Honorable Lady Justice Esther Maina, Judge of the High Court, and falsely threatened to file a petition against the said judge in gross violation of Article 160, Clause 5 of the Constitution. So a number of things are important, my lords, my lady. One, what does Article 160, Clause 5 of the Constitution provide? It provides that a member of the judiciary is not liable in an action or suit in respect of anything done or omitted to be done in good faith in the lawful performance of a judicial function. It's not liable in suit. You can't take them to court. If you look at ground number 4 and particulars of paragraph 34, it is alleging that the threat to take a judge to the Judicial Service Commission is a violation of Article 160, Clause 5. I wonder, their lawyers are here, they will tell us. In fact, some senators are actually here, they will tell us. How does Senate read Article 160, Clause 5 as against Article 168, Clause 2? Because Article 168, Clause 2 constitutionally gives any person the right to initiate a petition before the Judicial Service Commission for the removal of a judge. So if you state that you are going to pursue an Article 168, Clause 2 process, how can that be a violation of Article 160, Clause 5? I was taught many years ago, I hope it's still learning today, the Constitution is not self-annihilating. We cannot read Article 160, Clause 5 to destroy Article 168, Clause 2. So that the National Assembly brought a case to the Senate that a claim by the Deputy President that he is going to file a petition against Justice Esther Maina is a violation of Article 160, Clause 5. The Senate approved that ground for the removal of the Deputy President. Now, let's not lose focus of this, my lords. The express text of the ground and the particulars at paragraph 34 of the motion is that the Deputy President had falsely threatened to file a petition against Justice Maina. Now, the Supreme Court has told us the ground must be substantiated. So I will now take you how the motion mover substantiated the ground. If you look at page 60 of the Hansard of 16th October 2024, so on the attached the affidavit of Jeremiah Nyegenye as Annex JN10, the following conversation takes place. The motion mover is being cross-examined by yours truly. The Hansard of the Senate captures me as asking this question: do you still stand by that part of your allegation that he has not presented the complaint to the Judicial Service Commission as at that date? The motion mover says, I have since learned that he did present the petition. The motion mover is conceding that his claim in the motion that the Deputy President falsely threatened to file the petition cannot pass muster. Yours truly, my lords, then suggests to him that to the extent that you say that he has not presented the allegation to the JSC as at 26th September 2024, that allegation is not true. Is it? The motion mover says, we are in agreement, counsel. The motion mover concedes that the ground on which his motion is founded, ground 4, cannot be substantiated. With this Hansard before them, members of the Senate voted to approve this ground. Can it be said that in view of this concession by the motion mover, that ground had been substantiated, that it passed the threshold? The third aspect I want my lords to reflect on when you retire, you can answer this question either way. Some of us enjoy reading these judgments either way. But I want direct answers to these questions. A judge has had a case and delivered a judgment and become functus officio. Can a verbal criticism of the manner in which that judge conducted herself in that case constitute a violation of the decisional independence of the judge? That's what the ground said. It said gross violation of Article 161 of the Constitution on the institutional and decisional independence of judges. Can a verbal criticism of a judge, because of a decision she has already rendered and become functional official, amount to a threat to the decisional independence of that judge? Which decision? She has already rendered the decision. I submit to you, my lords, that it is actually good democratic practice to subject judicial decisions to heightened scrutiny. It is good practice. It grows judicial accountability. And therefore, what the Senate did by approving this ground was a clawback on an important democratic practice of enhancing judicial accountability. The two grounds that I want to build simultaneously are grounds 5 and 6, because they suffer the same fate of inadequacy. Grounds 5 and 6. Ground 5, and both of them were approved. So I've already dealt with one that was approved. I'm dealing with two others. Then I'll deal with two others to finish the 5 that were approved. Ground 5 accused the Deputy President of gross violation of Articles 3.1 and 148.5a of the Constitution and fidelity to the oath of office and allegiance. Then ground 6 provided that the Deputy President, that there were serious reasons to believe that the Deputy President had committed a crime under sections 13(1)(a) and 62 of the National Cohesion and Integration Act. Those were the two grounds. So, a ground must be supported by particulars. That's what the Supreme Court has said. Then the particulars must be substantiated. Now, when you look at the motion, ground 5 had no particulars of its own. Ground 6 had no particulars of its own. Instead, what the drafter of this motion, in his drafting wisdom, did was to say the grounds in support of ground 5, the particulars in support of ground 5 are the particulars in grounds 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's what he said. Similarly, in respect of ground 6, the drafter didn't supply particulars. Instead, he said the particulars in support of ground 6 are the grounds set out in the particulars set out in grounds 1, 2, 3, and 4. My lords, as experienced jurists, you know better than I do that particulars are the specific acts or omissions constituting the wrongdoing. The specific acts or omissions constituting the wrongdoing. The National Assembly went to the Senate and said, we are charging the Deputy President in ground 5 and ground 6 because of the acts and omissions we have referred to in grounds 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is that a permissible way of framing a charge of impeachment? I began by setting out that it has been established that the grounds, the charges in impeachment are framed in the same manner as charges in a criminal case. This court, the High Court rather, has held in 3 different cases. The case of BMK versus Republic, 2020 EKLR. The case of LKO versus Republic, 2022 EKLR. And the case of Etiang versus Republic, 2022 EKLR. I just refer to one because they make the same principle. Justice Ongudi said, and I quote, "The problem I find in the charge sheet is one of multiplicity of charges." Then she defines multiplicity. Multiplicity in a charge sheet arises from charging of a single criminal act as multiple separate counts. This may result in violation of the right of an accused person under Article 50, Clause 2, Paragraph O of the Constitution. That multiplicity of charges is a violation or a threat to Article 50, Clause 2, Paragraph O. And it defines multiplicity to mean charging a single act as multiple separate counts. So therefore, when the National Assembly tells us that the acts in ground 1, 2, 3, 4 are the same acts that constitute the ground 5 and ground 6, these 2 grounds were bad for multiplicity. They were a violation of Article 50 of the Constitution. They cannot found a threshold for impeachment. Both of the 2 grounds were approved by the Senate as constituting the basis for removal of the Deputy President from office. But there's something very bad about it. The Senate voted to approve grounds 5 and 6 on the particulars set out in 1, 2, 3, and 4, and ground 5 on the particulars set out in grounds 1, 2, 3, and 4, but acquitted the Deputy President of grounds 2 and 3. And remember, they gave no reasons for convicting. And that's how obscene this trial in plenary is, as my learned colleague, Mr. Chell Dudley, will take you through in a short while. Then finally, ground 1. Ground 1 accused the Deputy President of gross violation of Articles 10(2)(a), B, and C, 73(1)(a) and 2B, 75(1) and C, so 75(1)(c) and 129(2) of the Constitution, and Articles 47(1) as read together with Articles 131(2)(c) and D of the Constitution. In summary, my lords, these were the grounds that accused the Deputy President of talking about shares in government and shareholding in government. Let me just paraphrase it like that. That's in summary what this is about. My learned colleague, Mr. Tom Masharia, took the motion mover through cross-examination on this ground. You will find that at pages 88 to 94 of the Hansard of 16th October 2024. So a number of things emerged. I just summarize them. Number one, the motion mover confirmed that the government of the day in Kenya is formed by a coalition of parties named the Kenya Kwanza Coalition. Motion mover confirmed that as a fact. Number two, he confirmed that the Kenya Kwanza Coalition was formed of pre-election coalition agreements involving various parties. Number three, among the parties were UDA, ANC, Ford Kenya, and PAA or PA, as is sometimes called. And my lord, this must come out very succinctly from me. It bears that PA is the party whose party leader was the Speaker of the Senate presiding over these proceedings. When you finally take time to read pages 88 to 94, the motion mover confirmed that each of these coalition agreements made references to sharing of government. And they expressly spoke about sharing government positions and sharing resources. You'll see the coalition agreement between Ford Kenya and ANC talking about certain roads in Western Kenya, nowhere else. You will see the coalition agreement with the PA talking about development of marine resources in coastal Kenya. You will see positions, the leader of Ford Kenya being promised the position of the Speaker of the National Assembly and certain cabinet portfolios and principal secretary portfolios. The leader of the party called PA being promised a position of the Speaker of the Senate. The question, therefore, is that when parties enter coalition agreements and pre-election manifestos, it is the people who determine whether they want to be associated with that kind of manifesto or that kind of pre-election arrangement at an election. For some reason, the people of Kenya chose this agreement with shareholding arrangements in 2022. If the people of Kenya are unhappy, they have another opportunity in 2027 to deal with it. And that is exactly what the High Court set out in the Sonko decision that I have just referred to. If you look at the High Court Sonko decision at paragraph 258, the High Court says an impeachment is an important remedy, but one of last resort. It is one to be used where there is an injury to the people. The remedy should be limited to only the gravest political wrongs. This is because the person to be removed came to office through a popular mandate. The will of the people should therefore not be overturned on flimsy grounds. It must therefore be shown that the wrong committed by the official proposed to be impeached cannot wait to be corrected through the ordinary electoral cycle. If the people of Kenya had gone to the 2022 elections on the strength of this pre-election arrangements that talked about shareholding, it follows that they had a chance to revisit that question at the next election cycle. That's what the High Court is telling us. But, my lords, the more interesting one for me is at page 95 of the Hansard of 16th October 2024. You'll find the following very interesting conversation between Counsel Tom Macharia and the motion mover, Ecomas Mwenge Mutuse. I'll briefly take through the conversation, my lord, but you will take note of the pages and revisit it when you retire to do duty of writing judgment. Tom Macharia begins by playing a video to the motion mover and puts the question, who is speaking in that video? The motion mover, Mwenge Mutuse, responds, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Honorable William Ruto. Tom Macharia then poses the question, which words did he use? What did he say to the people of Murang'a? Mwenge Mutuse says he has appointed many of the locals into his government. Tom Macharia prods further, did he say, nyinyi watu wa Murang'a ni shareholders wakubwa wa hii serikali? Mwenge Mutuse says, yes, he did. The people of Kenya have no difficulty waiting to assess their president at the next election cycle in 2027 following this conversation. The question we want you to deal with is this. Why is the president's reference to the people of Murang'a as shareholders in his government acceptable political rhetoric? And a similar reference to the people of Nandi and Kericho, because those are the areas mentioned in the motion, by his deputy, an impeachable offense. It's worth noting that when you read the conversations I've told you at pages 88 to 94, you'll find that the person who witnessed the pre-election pact in Kenya Kwanza was Professor Kithure Kindiki, and despite witnessing agreements with the shareholding model in it, the National Assembly had no difficulty approving it now to become the deputy president. It is that uneven-handedness that we want this court to ask itself this question. Did the National Assembly find a wrong, then sought to establish who is the wrongdoer to be punished, then found the deputy president? Or did it find the deputy president, then asked, what wrong can we put on him to punish him? Which is what appears to me to have transpired in this set of circumstances. I have taken you through the 5 grounds that were approved by the Senate to demonstrate to you that they were bad for multiplicity. That's grounds 5 and 6. They fell short of the threshold as set out in Article 150 of the Constitution, as expanded upon through judicial interpretation. And therefore, generally, they could not found a motion for removal of the deputy president from office. While principally, therefore, beseeching this court to allow this petition, allow me now to invite my learned colleague, Mr. Chell Dudley, to take you through the reading of the constitutional prescription on the impeachment procedure and how the interpretation of those provisions by the Speaker of the Senate fell way off the mark. Mr. Dudley, you're welcome. Thank you, my lord.
Thank you. Thank you, my lord, for the opportunity to address you on this important question. When we last left the court, I had thought that we were done with jurisdiction, but the National Assembly spends the first 32 pages of their submissions saying that you either lack jurisdiction, or if you have it, then you're limited to looking at the process. And you should not hear the substantive violations that my two colleagues have told you about. They cite, quite helpfully to us, a Filipino case, Francisco versus House of Representatives, where the Filipino Parliament had similarly argued that the Filipino judiciary had no jurisdiction to review impeachment proceedings. The court concluded that that process has procedural safeguards, and therefore it answers to a legal process. My lord, that stance, the stance that the proceedings you're dealing with are both political and legal, is found in the report of the Technical Working Group D on the executive. My senior counsel, team leader, Paul Mwito, was a delegate number 114. The current speaker was delegate number 209 at the CKRC conference. And you'll hear Professor Githu Muigai, when he rises, tell you that these provisions on impeachment were hotly contested. They were the most contentious provisions. And so, my lord, detail was paid to these provisions. The law is that Parliament does not waste words. Every word in a legislation must be given a meaning. Now, let me begin with what's common ground. On 9th October 2024, JN4, the affidavit of Jeremiah Nyegenye at paragraph 22, the morning sitting, in the Hansard, the Speaker of the Senate misleads the Senate, saying that we have two options to deal with this motion, alike the procedure for governors and deputy governors. He says we have a motion, is the first, for impeachment of deputy president, but we have two options that we have when it comes to the impeachment of deputy governors and governors. My lord, that is a heresy. And because of that, just common ground again, the Senate does not form the committee. The special committee under Article 145(3) is not formed. Why? The Speaker misleads the House that they have two options. They can either investigate the charges by committee, Article 145(3)(a), or they can investigate by plenary, like they do for governors. My lord, I request that my lords be given our rejoinder submissions, table 1, because I intend to spend a moment or two there. My lord, the Senate picks the 10-day timeline applicable to the special committee. Remember, they've dropped the committee. They've said, no, we have two options. We are investigating it in plenary. But they retain the 10-day timeline applicable to that special committee. And so, when the deputy president falls ill, my colleagues have addressed this, the Speaker holds on to the 10-day deadline applicable to the special committee for a plenary hearing. And the members of the Senate vote to deny the deputy president even the benefit of that 10 days, the balance of it. They say we must conclude our business today. In doing that, the Senate grossly violated the Constitution. My lord, let me bring your attention to table 1. In Table 1, we've tabulated the differences between Article 145.3, Senate Standing Order 78 and 80, and Rule 2, Rules of Procedure for removal of the Deputy President by impeachment and governors. My Lord, Article 145.3 does not give two options, it gives one option, and it says that within 7 days after receiving notice of the National Assembly resolution, the Senate Speaker shall convene a meeting of the Senate to hear charges against the President, and the Senate, by resolution, may appoint a special committee comprising 11 of its members to investigate the matter. The special committee has a constitutional function. It investigates the charges for seriousness. Then it reports to the Senate. My Lord, there's a may which seems problematic here, but we'll tell you where that may originated. But as it is, it makes grammatical sense. The Senate must convene within 7 days, and if the Senate convenes in 7 days and the motion is approved, there's something worthy of investigation here, the Senate may appoint the committee. It must not appoint the committee always. Why? Because sometimes you'll find that it's flimsy. The charge is that the Deputy President, the President, wore a yellow shirt. He should have worn green. Or he wore a blue shirt when he should have worn a red one. Flimsy charges. My Lord, the test on threshold has already been laid to you. So literally, grammatically, Article 145.3a has an and. If you go to 143.5b and you begin with the Senate, by resolution, may appoint a special committee comprising 11 of its members to investigate the matter, and you leave the A, what have you done to the and? And is disjunctive. It means you must bring both elements of the law together. Parliament does not waste words. Every word used by Parliament in a law has meaning. And the court must give each word in the law meaning, especially if that law is a constitution. My Lord, staying with Table 1, Standing Order 78, which is a provision applicable to the President, reflects faithfully the wording in Article 145.3, word for word. Then, this is where the original sin happens. Standing Order 80, and that is on page 2 of our Table 1. I really hope that my lords have it so that we take this argument, because it's a technical one and it's on the details. But when you come to Standing Order 80, which is the procedure applicable to governors and deputy governors, it allows the Senate to investigate in plenary. Standing Order 81 says, within 7 days after receiving the resolution, the Speaker of the Senate shall convene a meeting of the Senate to hear charges against the governor. And the Senate may, 1, by resolution, appoint a special committee comprising 11 of its members to investigate the matter, or investigate the matter in plenary. The Speaker imports this or in Standing Order 80, brings it to Standing Order 78, replaces the and there. The Senate shall convene and may by resolution appoint a committee. He replaces that and, he deletes it. He uses or. So he tells the senators you have two options. You can go investigate this by special committee, or you can investigate it by plenary, like we do for governors. My Lord, if you look at the constitutional article for impeachment of governors, you will not find the kind of detail that you have in Article 145. Why? My learned friend, my senior Professor Guido, will tell you that this Article 145 was intensely debated. It was one of the most contentious provisions in the history of the making of the Constitution. So it comes complete with detail. But the Speaker here replaces the word or in Standing Order 80 and takes it to Standing Order 78 to Article 145.3. He deletes and implants or. What misled the Speaker could be is Rule 2. My Lord, that's the last item, number 4, on page 2 of our Table 1. Rule 2, Rules of Procedure, also makes the same mistake. It replaces the legislative word and in Article 145 with the or, disjunctive. My Lord, Rule 2 says the Senate may in plenary investigate the matter and determine whether the particulars of the allegations against the President have been substantiated. It has now omitted. The special committee is gone. So Rule 2 goes to 145.3 and then descends to B by plenary. It's saying the Senate may investigate by plenary. Where did this error originate in the making of our Constitution? My Lord, I go to that because if, suppose we are not making sense and our argument is too full of grammar, the theory of holistic interpretation requires you to look at the text, which we have done, and the history. What was the history? And how did we end up with a provision that, quote unquote, could sound difficult? My Lord, the theory of holistic interpretation is mainstreamed as a theory of interpreting our Constitution. Let us then travel back in time to the Bomas Conference. But my Lord, before I do that, allow me to draw your attention to a fresh new publication of the Senate. And that is a digest of the law and practice on removal of county governors and deputy county governors from office through impeachment. First edition, brand new, published last year. I apologize, I haven't yet produced it to the court. I intend to do that, but it's also available online, thanks to the Senate. My Lord, the Senate worries about this process. It says committee vis-a-vis plenary proceedings. And the Senate, this is about governance. It says that the law does not provide for any specific procedure. Page 104, a case digest. You do not have it yet. I've just apologized that I came across it yesterday because it's a new publication, but I will put it on record. When you turn to it and you look at page 104, you'll find that the Senate says that the law does not provide for any specific procedure. As a result, the county assemblies and the Senate are not bound to follow any route. That is what informs the rules of procedure, where the Senate may investigate. And that is also what informs Standing Order 80, where the Senate may use plenary to investigate. But, my Lord, the Senate recognizes what this court has in Sonko High Court. This court said that we are of the considered view that impeachment of a governor is a serious undertaking. The impeachment of a deputy president, of a president, is a more serious undertaking. For this reason, we recommend that it will be desirable in future impeachments to proceed through the committee route as opposed to the plenary. This High Court has recognized the inherent risks in investigating through plenary. Why? We say so because when the special committee is appointed, the Article 145(3)(a) committee, it has 10 days to deliberate on the matter, thus giving many opportunities to the parties to prepare their cases adequately. The committee gives the perception that each member is actually engaging in the process as opposed to the plenary, which can be perceived to be a mob lynching process. That's exactly what happened here. The investigation in plenary was a mob lynching process. The Senate goes on to say that trial by the committee, page 105, a case digest on removal of governors and deputy governors, a publication of the Senate, brand new 2025 bond. Trial by committee gives the Senate, through the 11 members, an opportunity to review the usually voluminous documents from the governor's team. A trial by committee over the 10 days would have given the Senate the time to review.
And the request to clarify the record while my colleague is addressing that point. In his written submissions, that decision is describing, it is described as a decision of the Supreme Court, but it is actually a decision of the High Court. So that we don't have to later belabor this point now that we're addressing it, can he confirm? Because the written record says it is a decision of the Supreme Court, but it's actually a decision of the High Court.
I'm grateful that my learned friend, Mr. Mudomi Thiankol, a very good friend of mine, felt compelled to interrupt at this point, indicating its importance. It's an easy one. The decision is High Court, Sonko. There's a typo saying it's Supreme Court. It's High Court, but it's what the court has said. Now here, at page 105, where I was, the Senate is speaking to a member of staff of the Senate involved in this process. That's what this report highlights there. And this member of staff, I hope it's my learned friend, Ms. Tanji, is saying that trial by committee, the special committee under Article 145, 3A, gives members and would have given the deputy president's team enough time to interact with the senators on the voluminous record. Because of the fewer members, the committee is able to probe and follow up with specific questions, especially where the grounds for impeachment are technical. Perhaps the committee would have caught out that in Robert Alai, a case I was fortunate to argue with my learned friend Mr. Ongoya, the court had already nullified section 132 of the Penal Code on undermining the authority of a public officer. Well, this did not happen in this case. And finally, it records here that the plenary, it also says that there are some benefits to the plenary report as well. My Lord, in short, what you are saying is that the motion to impeach the deputy president was contingent on the special committee's report. It's not just procedural. There's also a substantive right given to him before that committee. Look at Article 145(5) of the Constitution. The deputy president has a right to be heard before that committee. The committee investigating the serious charges leveled against him. That step was omitted. That's a grave violation of the Constitution. My Lord, the final chance that he had to be heard was also denied to him, the adjournment. When something like that happened in a case that my friend, Professor Ojenda, Senior Counsel, argued with his usual merit, Onyango Law versus Kisumu County Assembly, Service Board, 2025 Kenya Court of Appeal, 333, the Court of Appeal was persuaded that Onyango Law had been denied a fair hearing. And just like in Oloma Law, the Senate here speedily approved the motion, skipped that special committee altogether, but retained the 10-day timeline. I wonder what the 10-day timeline was doing in a plenary setting where the Constitution does not impose that 10-day timeline, but requires reasonableness. It obviously can't delay until the end of the term, but that 10-day timeline was a stranger in the process. And so the Court of Appeal was persuaded that Onyango Olo was unfairly impeached. My Lord, we ask you to take the Onyango Olo decision and...
I don't interrupt at this stage. I don't like interrupting things at all. But just out of Onyango Olo was given 1 hour. The Deputy President had 10 minutes.
My Lord, whereas the special committee would have had the Deputy President over 10 days, he was investigated in plenary over 24 hours and impeached in his absence. So I ask you again to take the Onyango Law decision, and where it says Onyango Law, please substitute Rigathi Gachagua and make your decision. My Lord, let me take you to the drafting history of our Article 145. It was not initially there as Article 145. And my Lord, the theory of holistic interpretation requires you to consider our social, our political, our historical context as a people. That history has names like Oginga Odinga, mistreated by the president, unfairly removed from office. It has Kungu Karumba, George Saitoti, at some point, not appointed at all, reappointed after the elections. I forget which year, I was a young boy then. But in your ruling of 31st October 2024, my Lord, you recognize this history, and you said that the Vice President served entirely at the President's mercy. That was a framework that the 2010 Constitution sought to transform. And under the 2010 Constitution, the office of the Deputy President is fundamentally redefined. Your words? It was safeguarded from arbitrary and capricious actions by the President. Before the Senate, on 16th October 2024, another good friend, Senior Counsel Otiende Amolo, a former member of the Committee of Experts, who was familiar with the drafting history of Article 145, reflected as follows, and I quote, "Before the 2010 Constitution, we would not have been here for this process for 2 days. We would not have been taking this process in the National Assembly. The President would sack the Vice President at whims, including for not liking the color of his shoes." So my example of the color of his coat was not so far-fetched. It is on the Hansard record. My Lord, that's a correct reflection on the intention, on the history, on the motivations, on the framing of Article 145. In the National Land Commission versus Attorney General Supreme Court advisory opinion, the court held that unlike the independence constitution that failed to articulate the history and struggles of the people, the 2010 Constitution integrates that history and the people's view. And so, my Lord, when you turn to interpret Article 145 and you encounter the challenge with the may appearing in the second part of it, in 135 3b, and you wonder why does it appear this way, you must remember the history. Speaking of history, at page 182 of the CKFC final report, and that, my Lord, is a lawyer's Bible, is a constitutional lawyer's Bible. It is the reference point for ambiguous text. We go back to it to see what was the intention here, what was the struggle, what was the mischief. The people said that, I quote, "there should be adequate mechanisms to avoid the risk of impeachment being used for purely political motives." Page 802 of that CKFC final report records that impeachment was one of the most contentious issues leading to extreme polarization amongst delegates. And the issue was not about the desirability of impeachment. No, it was about the procedure. What procedure do we use? Because we agree that the president must be amenable to impeachment. It is a remedy of last resort. But what procedure do we use? My Lord, in the Bomas draft that came out of that conference, the CKFC proceeding, we had Article 164. Article 164 of the Bomas draft is the exact replica of today's Article 145, except it had a bit more clarity. Why? Because the kind of Thank you, my Lord. My Lord, because the kind of contestations that attend the making of any constitution had not been there. Remember, by the time we are getting to 145, we've gone through a failed referendum. We've had the WACO draft. We've also had the Naivasha process that messes up and moves articles around. So back in Bomas, Article 164, this is what 164.4 said. If a motion is passed under Clause 3, Clause 3, the Speaker of the Senate is considering what has come from the National Assembly. The Senate shall appoint 13 of its members as a special committee in accordance with the standing orders to investigate the matter. So this committee was there, 164.4 Bomas draft. The special committee shall investigate the matter, 164.5 Bomas draft, and shall within 10 days. So the 10 days is also there. It's not a new invention under 145. 164 Bomas draft had it. And the president shall have the right to appear and be represented before the committee. So this right also to be heard before the committee was also there. 164 Bomas draft. My Lord, we then had the Guy draft, 163. This clause appeared at Article 163 of the Guy draft, and it also said that if a motion is passed under Clause 2, the Speaker shall constitute a special committee comprising the Chief Justice and 13 members of the National Council. So even when this committee was thought the Chief Justice should sit on it, it was there. When the name changed to National Council, the committee was there. It has consistently been there. Article 163.5 of the Guy draft provided that the president would have the right to appear and be represented before the special committee. So when it was Article 163.5 and not 145.5, the deputy president's right to appear was there. I take you next to 2009 harmonized draft constitution by the Committee of Experts. My Lord, 163.4 of the Guy draft also required the committee to investigate. So its function was there. Its composition changed a little bit, but the entitlement to appear before this committee and to be heard during the investigation of the charges was consistent. Article 170, 2009 harmonized draft. Now we are getting closer to the referendum. 173, upon hearing the charges under Clause 2, Article 173, 2009 harmonized draft, upon hearing the charges under Clause 2, the charges approved in the motion that has come from the National Assembly, the Senate may, by resolution, appoint a special committee comprising 11 of its members to investigate the matter. So the number is now at 11. And the special committee shall investigate the matter within 10 days and report to the Senate whether it finds the particulars of the allegations against the president to have been substantiated. The president, you can guess, shall have the right to appear and be represented before the special committee during its investigations. My Lord, now we go to Naivasha. A constitution is a political charter. It will have vagueness of phraseology. Why? Because you need to get consensus and have the document passed, or you have no constitution at all. And so we take it as it comes, with ambiguity. But that's not the kind of ambiguity that scares this court. The court would be adept to interpret the Constitution together with those ambiguities, understanding its history. Now, ambiguity is coming in. Naivasha, the Parliamentary Select Committee, a committee of politicians, they moved this clause to Article 127.3. And they're saying, upon hearing the charges under Clause 2, the National Assembly, now, they're also shifting it from the Senate. They're bringing it to the National Assembly, Naivasha. The National Assembly may, by resolution, appoint a select committee comprising 11 of its members to investigate the matter. My Lord, from 127.3, Naivasha, it gets back to 145, and it brings with it the may, which is there today. That's how it sounds vague. That's why it appears ambiguous. My Lord, throughout that history, the 10-day period is there. I am concluding, my Lord. The function of the committee, it's okay, my Lord. The function of the committee is also there. And the deputy president's right to appear before it is there. And so, when on 9th October 2024, the Speaker misleads the House, telling it that you have two options, what is the source of that authority? Where does the Speaker get the right to amend the Constitution in his directions to senators? What gives him the right? It's not even the standing orders. My Lord, he fuses, the Speaker fuses Standing Order 78, Standing Order 80, the Rules of Procedure, and Article 145. And in that process, Article 145 suffers violence.
Just clarify, you said that it appears ambiguous.
Yes.
Is it ambiguous?
It is not ambiguous. If you look at its history, if you look at its intention, if you consider that constitution making, Speaker of the Senate versus Attorney General, is a political process, it is quite clear. The Senate may appoint that committee if it finds that there's something to be investigated. My Lord, blue shoes, nothing to investigate. What's the committee to investigate? But if there's something that appears plausible, there's something that needs some kind of investigation, then the Senate must appoint that committee. So the may turns to must. It must only appoint if there's something to be investigated. If it concludes that there's nothing to be investigated, the malicious and malicious compliance, if there's nothing to be investigated, it doesn't need to appoint the committee. My Lord, let me move forward and say that in Speaker of the Senate, the Supreme Court explains precisely this kind of phenomenon, where the document born out of long-drawn negotiations, 2002, when I was a schooler, to 2010, when I joined the university, long-drawn process. The document is looked at, touched by many hands, including a number represented before the bar today. Constitution making requires compromise, which can occasionally lead to this kind of contradictions, where you have a shall in 145.3a and the may in 145.3b, and to those who are mischievous, it appears to be ambiguous. My Lord, political and social demands of compromise that mark constitutional moments fertilize vagueness in phraseology and draftsmanship. And when there's such, where do we turn? We turn to the court. And we ask you to interpret Article 145.3, considering the history I've laid out. Constitution making does not end with promulgation, it continues with interpretation. It is the duty of the court to illuminate legal penumbras that constitutions born out of long-drawn compromises such as ours tend to create. My Lord, the spirit of the Constitution has to be invoked by the court as a searchlight for illumination and elimination of these legal penumbras. My Lord, if this clause was so contentiously debated, and nearly cost us the Constitution. How is it that the drafters could have intended that Senate can investigate these serious charges in plenary without saying so? How can such a serious provision be left to inference by a technical interpretation of the word may? That because it says may, that's discretionary. What about the and before the may? My Lord, how could the drafters have intended that Senate could investigate in plenary within 24 hours, even denying the subject of the impeachment a fair hearing? I turn to an issue of comparative constitutionalism. My Lord, no other country has a similar kind of fast-track impeachment that can be done in 24 hours. No other democratic country, at least according to my research. South Africa has the panel at Article 89 of its constitution. We call it special committee. South Africa calls it independent panel. The role of that independent panel, Section 89 South African Constitution, is to determine if sufficient evidence exists of a serious constitutional violation before the National Assembly votes. The role of this special committee was to sieve off some of these things that we are now confronting you with. Section 132 Penal Code, nullified. How can it form an impeachment charge? United States uses the House Judiciary Committee to investigate the charges. My Lord, in Nigeria, Article 143.5 of the Nigerian Constitution, there's a panel of 7 members appointed by the Chief Justice of persons of unquestionable integrity, but who are not politicians or civil servants for independence. Panel of 7 appointed by the Chief Justice. If my learned friend, Professor Ogenda, were not a senator, but were a Nigerian citizen, he would sit definitely on this panel. In Philippines, Article 11, Section 3, that it's called the Committee on Justice, this special committee. In South Korea, Article 65, the committee is called the Legislation and Judiciary Committee. It investigates the charges after a motion is proposed, though the Constitutional Court ultimately will adjudicate the trial. In India, Article 61, it's called Investigating House Committee. My Lord, the long and short of it is that what we had here was not a constitutional process that is worthy of this court's protection. If you faithfully interpret Article 145, if you just have one look at Standing Order 78, at Standing Order 80, if you look at the rules of procedure, Rule 2, and then you spend time, my Lord, with the history of Article 145, you will arrive at one inevitable conclusion. That is the conclusion that failing to appoint the special committee required by Article 145(3), my Lord, grossly violated the Constitution. And that violation was not harmless. It bogged the Senate down into a fictitious timeline. It said we are not appointing the committee, we have 2 options. No, they did not. But then they retained the 10-day given to that committee and said they're using that for the plenary investigations. What do you have? You have a sham of a trial. And in trying to punish the man, Rigathi Gachagua, in that way, the Senate and the National Assembly demeaned his office. They demeaned the office while trying to punish the man. And in demeaning the office, they, my Lord, grossly violated the Constitution. My Lord, thank you for the opportunity to address you.
I think we have made good progress with adjourn for lunch, then we come back at 2:30.
That's right.
Thank you so much. You brought that argument. You know that argument yesterday I did very fast. But after a while it began making a lot of sense.